So we're going straight into an ATM. Just wait for some people to come and find their place. And can you lie on your stomach? Take your shoes off, loosen belts, all of that stuff, glasses. Can you... I could talk a bit louder. Okay. And just lie on your stomach in a position that's as comfortable as you can find. And just notice your response to this position. Is it easy to get comfortable here? And how do you scan in this position? What's different? How do you settle? What's your internal sense? And could you pay attention to your contact with the floor, the front surface of yourself, connecting to the ground? And notice if there are places that seem to be pressing into the floor. And places that may not be connected to the floor at all. And how have you chosen to put your head? Does that have some bearing on the way that your pressure is resting into the floor? The way your weight is distributed? Is there something you notice about your breathing in this position? Parts of you that move with your breath? It may not normally be so clear. And maybe parts that you normally can sense easily when you scan on your back that feel a little different. And what would be the heaviest part of you, do you think? If you think of each arm, each leg, your pelvis, your chest, your head, if you think in those kind of sections, would one part be heavier? And would one part feel lighter for you? So now could you bring your arms on the floor above your head or above you somewhere? So the idea is that your arms are fairly straight and they're in that space above your head or out to the sides a little bit, wherever you can be comfortable. So if your arms can stretch straight overhead in front of you, that's fine. But if it's more comfortable to be out a little, to the sides, Do what you need to do. Find a place where your arms can be positioned there. And how does that change the way that your pressure rests into the floor, the way that your weight lands on the floor? And turn your head to the other side, softly, gently, and just see if that changes the way that your weight is resting there. What do you sense in your chest, your belly, your pelvis? And then can we have everybody with their head turned towards the right? Now, if that's really not a comfortable position for you, you can have your head to the left, but let's try it that way. So if you're facing towards your right arm, so the left side of your face is on the floor and you're looking towards the right. And could you do a movement? And we want this to be, this is the very first thing that we're doing this morning. So notice how you do it. Could you lift your right arm a little bit from the floor? And do this so slowly and softly that you don't feel that you're interrupting your breath, and you don't feel that you're going to work harder than you need to. So the question isn't, are you strong enough? Do you have enough muscle power to lift your right arm? But could you organise yourself to enable you to feel that your right arm is light enough that it could lift from the floor? Just try that a few times, slowly, softly, and observe what happens in the rest of you as you do that. Can you do it slowly enough that you can have that awareness of whether your weight shifts on the floor, where the effort is in that movement? And then let go of it, let your arm rest. Then can you lift your right leg? What happens differently here? And again, do it so slowly that you can feel the preparation for that movement. Not just make sure you, not just really trying to get that leg off the floor, but feeling how do you do it? How heavy is it? Where's the effort? What happens in the rest of you to allow you to do that? Just a couple of times, a few times. And then let that rest. And then could you try your left leg? The same idea. How far do you feel that you need to lift your leg to know that you're lifting it? You could just lighten the weight of your leg. If you're doing a big movement, could you make it a little smaller? Just lift a few centimetres so that you can track the movement a little more clearly. Feeling the shift of weight on the floor, feeling what happens in the rest of you, feeling the weight of this leg. Does it feel heavier than the other leg or lighter than the other leg? And let that down. And then could you lift your left arm, the arm behind you, softly. What's the first part of your arm that lifts? your shoulder, your elbow, your hand. What happens in your chest, in your pelvis. And how heavy does this arm feel compared to the other arm? And compared to your two legs? So then softly turn your head to the left and lift your left arm again and see if that makes any difference. Okay, and then rest. And at any time in this lesson, you can rest in any position that you like. So I know that for some people, you wouldn't choose to rest on your belly. So feel free whenever you like to come out of that position, to roll onto your side or onto your back. And feel how you're resting into the floor, in whatever position you're in, how you're breathing. Could you come onto your stomach again and turn your head to the right, have your arms outstretched as before. And come back to lifting your right arm, and could you lift your head with your right arm as well? So lift your head and your right arm and see how that's different. So you're facing your right arm, so you could actually look towards your hand as you lift your arm. Is it easier to lift your head with your arm, or is it easier to lift your arm by itself? Which way gives you a sense of more lightness? What happens in your chest, in your pelvis? Does something happen in your legs? Is there some way that one leg or the other leg seems to be connected to this movement of lifting your arm, your right arm? Go slowly enough that you can sense the connections. And if you are going to lift one leg at the same time as your right arm, which leg would feel lighter? And just try that. Oh, nearly. Slowly, softly. So lift your right arm and your left leg. Try that combination a few times, softly enough that there's no strain and no effort. And what do you feel on the front of yourself as you do that? So your right arm and your head and your left leg. Is there some feeling that there's a natural connection there on that diagonal? And as you lift, you feel that your right hand and your left foot are getting further apart from each other or closer together. And maybe one of those options helps to make your arm and your leg and your head a little lighter. Test it out. So when Zoran said the other day, "Welcome to Babyland," flat out on the floor with gravity pulling us down into the floor. See if you can channel your inner baby to experiment, to play, to find out how to be light. So have a rest. And have a rest whenever you like. And in whatever position you like. And then can you come back onto your belly again? And notice how that's going. Is the floor just as hard as when you started, or is it softening a bit for you? And could you turn your head again to the right? And this time can you lift your right arm and your head and your right leg? What's different now? Is that a lighter feeling or a heavier feeling for you? What needs to shift across the floor? What needs to activate? So it's the same leg now, your right leg and your right arm and your head. So a few times that combination. What happens in your pelvis and your chest and your belly at the front? Go slowly enough that you can sense. And then go back to your right, lifting your right arm and your head and your left leg. See what happens differently. When I was playing with this myself, I was thinking about if you watch the tennis sometimes on TV and they do those super slow motion. So think of this, which is already a very small movement, being a very slow motion movement so that you can feel all of the preparation that goes on. And not just the lifting, not just the separating from the floor, but how you do that. That's it. And then give it a rest again. You can just rest your arms or you can change position completely. Feel how you're breathing. And notice whether anything's feeling different for you as you scan through in whatever position. Sense your breathing again. The movement of your belly as the air comes in and the air comes out. So roll onto your belly again. And have your arms outstretched. And this time, could you turn your head to the left? And in this slow, soft, quiet way, can you find a way to lift your left arm and your head together in a way that feels light? If you're still feeling heavy, lift a very small amount and lift it slower. Maybe do the very first part of lifting without actually separating your arm and your head from the floor. Just so that you feel a lightening. Do you breathe out as you lift, or do you breathe in as you lift? Try both of those options. And then could you start to include your right leg in this movement? So at the same time as you're lifting your left arm and your head, could you lift your right leg as well? And could you do that in a way that's simultaneous? So the lightening of your left arm and your right leg happens in the same timing, so that it becomes one movement through your whole system. And what part of you remains clearly on the floor? How much of you? How much of the front of you? And how much lifts? Slowly, softly. Can you sense your belly still being involved in your breathing as you do this? And have a pause there. Rest on the floor. Change position if you need to. And otherwise rest there. Come again onto your belly. Arms outstretched on the floor above you. Head turned to the left. And this time lift your left arm and your head and your left leg. And how does that combination work for you? How do you organise yourself differently when you're lifting your arm and your head and your leg on the same side? Do you shift your weight differently on the floor? Does your pelvis shift? Does your chest shift? Do you press into the floor or do you roll across the floor a little? And when you've done that a few times, come back to lifting your left arm and your head and your right leg and see if that combination somehow has a logic to it through your system. Which combination feels lighter to you? the diagonal, or the same side. And how much of yourself is organising to lift your arm and your leg together? Is it just your arm and your leg? Or is there more of you? Are you lifting your arm and your leg? So have another rest. Any position. And feel how are you going in that internal sensing of yourself. Has anything changed in your relationship to the floor, in your breathing? In your sense of being heavy or light? So come again onto your belly, arms outstretched above you. Turn your head whichever way you feel most comfortable. And could you find whichever diagonal was easiest for you? The right arm and the left leg, or the left arm and the right leg? And can you lift along that diagonal again? And then could you do, once you've got your arm and your leg lifted and your head, the next time you lift that, could you lift your leg a tiny little bit higher and feel that your arm could go a little lower? And then let your leg down and lift your arm a little higher. So you sort of start to roll along that diagonal line. So that's it. But each time you lift something a little higher, the other end goes lower. So as your arm and your head lift a little, your leg goes down a little. As your leg lifts a little, your arm and your head go down a little. Like a lopsided rocking horse. Rolling along. But have the sense of how your connection on the floor changes as you do that. Can you feel how your belly can allow you to roll softly? The softer your chest is, the more easily your pelvis can move, the rounder your belly. Little, light, soft, slow, and then let that go. And then can you imagine doing that on the other side? So could you imagine with your head turned the other way? Just imagine at first a small lifting of your arm and your head. Feel the shift across the front surface of yourself as your weight moves across the floor. And then as you lower that a little, letting your leg lift, your opposite leg lift away from the floor a little. And then alternating between your arm lifting more and your leg lifting more. Each time one lifts a little, the other goes down a little. So you roll across the floor on that diagonal. And if you can imagine that, could you start to do that? You have a sense of lightness, of playfulness, of experimenting. And in that chapter that we were looking at last night, Feldenkrais talked about the space between thinking about doing an action and actually carrying that action out. And that this is the physical basis for awareness. So can you find that space between thinking about doing this rocking action and actually doing it that allows you to be fully aware of yourself in that action? Feel the movement across your belly as you do that, across your chest. How does your abdomen become part of that movement? Then let it go and rest again. And in your resting, scan through again, see if you notice anything changing. Which parts of your breathing are clearer to you? So come onto your belly again, if you're okay to keep going with this. Same position, arms outstretched on the floor. And can you lift one of those diagonals softly and lightly as possible? Think of one arm and one leg and your head slowly lifting and slowly lowering. Can you lengthen on that diagonal as you lift? Then when you come to land, could you lift the other diagonal, your other arm and leg? So you're lifting the right arm and the left leg, and then the left arm and the right leg. Your head lifts each time. Feel the lift and feel the lowering. Can you find a smoothness and a softness and a lightness? Coordinating through the middle of yourself to let the extremities feel lighter. How do you breathe? Can your belly be part of this movement, this action? Okay. Pause there for a moment, and then could you see what it's like to lift all of those parts? 2 legs, 2 arms, head. Prepare yourself. Do it very, very slowly. Not as an exercise to see how strong you are, but to see how could you organise yourself to lift, to feel that your limbs are light enough to lift from the floor without effort and without strain, without holding your breath. Lifting and lowering, softly, lightly. How do you breathe? Try breathing out, expelling the air as you lift. See if that helps your belly to round into the floor. And let it down. And if you can have a sense of lengthening at the same time, arms and legs getting further from each other, hands and feet further from each other, hips and shoulders, lengthening across the front of yourself, and then have a rest again. And rest on your back for a moment if you haven't been onto your back yet. In that familiar position for scanning. And sense your connection to the floor here. And the movement of your breath, the movement of yourself as you breathe. And once more, roll over onto your belly. And you can have your arms wherever you like. And could you, in this position, could you think back to the movements we were doing yesterday, where you turned your legs around yourself. And from this position on your belly, can you imagine yourself doing that movement of swiveling both legs to the right or to the left as a starting point? And how your belly and your pelvis could turn to allow your legs to sweep around and come in front of you to bring you up to sitting. Do you have a sense of that action still in your system? Rolling your pelvis, shifting your weight, bringing your legs around. Letting your legs be separate from each other and light. Letting your head and your upper body be light enough to lift from the floor. And if you can imagine that, could you start to play with the movements that would let you do that? You could try swiveling both legs to one side or to the other side or to both, feeling that the movement across the floor allows your legs to be lighter, that the rolling of your belly allows your legs to be lighter. And gradually expand that movement to sweeping them around. You might bring your hands into that push-up position to let yourself come up more easily. And swing around again, down again. Do it a few times to whichever way is easiest for you. And your legs don't need to stay straight. They can bend and then straighten. They can be swing yourself around, letting your head lift, letting your legs lift. Do you feel any lighter for doing those little baby lifting movements. Coming down again, sweeping around. Okay. And then have a rest, whichever position. On your belly, on your back, on your side. Rest where you could be comfortable. Where you could tune in again. You could settle. And then could you roll onto one side with your knees and your hips bent as if you were sitting on a chair. And could you think back to the movements we did yesterday of sweeping your arm around in a circle underneath you, your underneath arm. Imagine it first. As much of the sensation of that movement as you can include. Movement of your arm and your shoulder. How could you organise your trunk to be light enough to allow your arm to sweep around underneath you? And then you could start to play with those movements. Of circling your arm, of finding the space underneath your waist, through that gap, making the gap easier, including your pelvis and your chest and your legs and your head, every part of you. And just notice whether anything feels different now as you play with that movement. If you're aware of something in your ribs or your belly or your head, or if there's a general sense of that. If anything has carried over from the lifting of your limbs on your belly, that helps you to organise this movement. You might need to create space around yourself. Okay, and then let it go. Rest again. And when you're ready, when you feel like you've settled, you've taken stock of your breathing and your self, you can roll to your side and come up to sitting and up to standing. And see how is it to come up from the floor. To come up onto your feet and to feel your limbs in this position. And your trunk. And to feel how the whole system organises in standing now. How do you breathe? How heavy are you? How light are you? How balanced are you? How easy is it to be upright? And then start to walk around a little. And how do you coordinate the movement of your arms and your legs through your trunk as you walk? And you can gradually increase the pace of your walking. See how your head fits into that. Start to look around the room. And take a little break. Or are we going straight into the... No? Yeah?